Hey everybody, welcome to the Proctored test review. If you're here, hopefully you have done either test 73 or test 60. And if all of you are anything like I was after sitting down and taking a PT, feel a little drained and exhausted. It is a long process. So kudos to you for still choosing to come here and make the most of your review after that test. I want to kind of start this strategy session with just a general overview of how I came to view practice tests and how I really stopped some problematic mindset traps and self-esteem issues that often taking PTs gave to my process. So what I want you to look at your LSAT study process across the board as a process of almost like training or improvement over a long period of time. One example that I think a lot of people are familiar with is maybe like exercise, right? Everybody has different fitness goals, either gain weight, lose weight. Taking a practice test is like stepping on a scale. So when you step on that scale, you get feedback of where you're at right now in this moment to some degree. That's what this PT does. However, what I want students to realize is that number that you see at the end of your PT is not reflective of your total skill set, of your ability at the test. It's just a reflection of what you just did right now in this moment. For me to actually change that number, whatever way I want, what I have to do is eat better, exercise, work out. No PT is going to be a learning or growth exercise to help me get better. So the one thing I want you to consider is as you take this PT, it's not a measure of your skill, your ability. It's not a prophecy of the next PT you're going to sit down and take. All it is a reflection of the specific method you applied in those 4 sections to answer questions for the last like 3 or so hours. That means you could be much better than your score gave you. You maybe could have overperformed a little bit based on the score you got back. The only way we can determine how we did and what lessons we should take from it is not only reflecting on the test content, but what we did specifically. I would often leave disappointing PTs with thoughts like, I'm not good enough. I'm not intelligent enough to get a high score on the test. I'm not going to be a lawyer. Or those thoughts like, oh my God, why am I worse at LG? How did I get so bad at LR out of a sudden? Last week, I was killing it. Now I seem to have lost all that ability. Keep in mind, as any measurement of yourself in the moment, this is just a reflection of one game that you played. The best player in the world, the best athlete at any sport, they're going to go out and they could play a stinker, right? But what do they do after that? They're going to watch the game tape, they're going to watch the film, they're going to see everything they did in that game, but they're also going to reflect on what led them into that process. So what I want to do is kind of start this session with a reflection of what you did and why you did it, not just questions and hopping into the content, but what parts of your exam did you feel stressed? At what times did you feel really confused? When did you notice you were getting kind of motivated by the clock or the timer and that ticking down? Those things impact our ability to apply the method that we want in this exam for maximum growth. I always try to use this type of model to frame how I want students to look at any type of review. But there are 2 things today we're going to talk about. One is the skills that you have as a test taker. So I want to switch to black. This is your specific ability to answer any given question that you're going to see on the LSAT. So do I have enough knowledge to answer this question, do this game, read this passage, and understand it? This is where we can make improvements by looking at explanations on LSAT Demon and seeing me talk about why right answers are right, wrong answers are wrong. All of those relate to like our skill category. Always and everywhere, we're probably improving this a little bit. What practice tests are, though, is not a reflection of your skill or ability. They're a reflection of your performance. What I have to do with these skills, ideally, translate 100% of my skills into performing on the test the way I want for 4 sections in a row, right? I could be super good at this test when I study. I still have to find a way on the test to do so. This arrow in between is what I often refer to as method. This is how I'm applying my skills, ideally that 1-to-1 ratio, to perform on the test 4 sections in a row with a weird little proctor looking at me through my camera, right? So over here, what we'll talk about is, test jargon, techniques for strengthened questions, how to make worlds, how to understand passages, all that. Over here, when we talk about performance, we're really reflecting on our method. Here we talk a lot about emotion, mindset, stressors, anxiety, all those things that can inhibit skills on the way. For you to ultimately grow the way you want from a practice test experience to an actual exam, what you have to do is identify which one of these areas can we really improve to fix the problems we identified on the test. Is this a question that when you look back on it, you're like, oh my God, why did I select that answer? This one just looks totally wrong to me now, yet on the test I chose it. I know how to do this question, I just didn't. Well, we need to assess what in our method led us there. Were there emotional components, stress components, rushing components? Or did you really get into a question and you were like, I felt totally out of sorts, didn't know how to make heads or tails of it, didn't really know what this question was asking, didn't know what the passage was about, couldn't figure out how to get started? Well, we're probably talking over here. In your review, do both of these things. Look at the times when you have a clear indicator. This is an opportunity for me to build my skills in the way that I need. And here is a chance for me to improve my method. The question that prompted me going on this whole rant was talking about how you can keep a practice test from really, really getting yourself down if it's a result that you didn't want. I had lots of these, lots of results I didn't want. I ended up taking the LSAT 4 times. I always tell my students in class that wasn't because I was excellent at it 4 times. It's because I was really bad at it 3 times. And the last time, I finally buckled down, studied for longer, changed a lot of my bad habits, and got a great score. So I had LSAT scores that were all the way down back to my diagnostic after 6 to 7 months of study, actual LSATs. I know how it feels to look at a score and have it not be what you want, or to have that awful PT and really get in a tailspin about it. What I started to realize, though, is that my study, my drilling, the practice sections that I'd done, the PTs that were good, the sections that I did like, those are also accurate reflections of my skill or ability. So I started to look at those practice tests not as an assessment of my character, worth, or ability, but just a measure of like one game that I played, their one workout that I did, their one video game level that I tried to beat. Sometimes they don't go so hot, but that doesn't mean I'm not as good at the test as I was yesterday or last week or a couple days ago. I am still that person. But what became helpful in my review was to identify in this test, though, where did I start to go into a tailspin? Where was that skill not applied cleanly, effectively, efficiently for me to get the answer? No test can tell you how good you are at the test overall. All a test can tell you is how good you were at that test on that day at that time. So all of you have a number that tells you that, how you did at the test you just took today at this time. Any future PT, any actual LSAT is going to tell you the same. Where we assess our overall skill and overall ability at this test is through the course of our study, seeing ourselves doing practice sections, seeing ourselves doing practice tests, looking at data sets in aggregate over a long period of time, a long trend. So when we look at ultimate growth, I want it to be in that frame. Every test is an opportunity to learn if we let it. But the one thing that inhibits learning more than anything is feeling really down and bad about our self-worth after an experience like this. And I've totally been in that boat. So any of those feelings we want to process today, happy to tell you how I did it. Also happy to hop into some test content here, but I do just kind of want to start with some general Q&A about test experience before we hop into doing specific questions. Does anybody have questions about the way to take a test, prepare for a test, mindset during a test, any of those more general things before we hop into some of these specific questions? Or even how to review a test. This is just while I open up some of these questions. You can raise your hand. Yeah, Javier.
Yeah, I guess I have kind of those two. I haven't like taken an official one yet, so when I do, I guess I go on and I register through LSAC, and it's gonna send me, I guess, a link, right? And then I'll go. That's test date. same proctored like this, clear my room. And then my second question is, I guess that too, the review, like the whole concept of blind reviewing after this test, like even without you being here taking, questions, how do I personally go over, without being overwhelmed or, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as the specific mechanics of signing up for your test and getting a time, it's probably changed a little bit since I was taking LSATs. They switched proctor companies, but I think the overall big picture stuff is still the same. So you got to give your money to Caesar. You got to pay LSAT, however much money they require you to pay for a test these days. Always too much, it feels like. You got to do that to register for that. And then what they'll do is they'll have you schedule a time with the specific proctor company. I can't even remember the name of this one they have now if you're doing it online, or you can register at an in-person testing location. That's an option that's available for you now that I wasn't able to do. So if anybody wants to talk about pros and cons, thoughts about in-person testing versus remote, happy to do that as well. So you're going to have to pay LSAC, schedule with Proctor Company. For me, when I had to schedule with Proctor U, if I had limited time, like in the weekend of the test, it was critical that like I was on there immediately when that scheduling link opened to schedule. The times went pretty quick often. And so if you're a little bit more open in your schedule, it's fine. But for me, this is how my brain works and why I was a little bit goofy. I wanted to like take the practice test or take the actual test at the same time I usually took my practice test, right? So if I was a morning practice test taker, I wanted to take it in the morning. And that's how I was. And so I really wanted to fight for some of those morning times to do that. If I would have taken it in the evening, who knows? My stress all through the day probably would have built. I would have been worried about it. Other people are the opposite. They kind of want to get their day started, live their life, then come back and take the test after having time to prepare. So when it comes to scheduling, that's what I know. As far as like growing from this test experience, though, it's a little bit of what I just talked about in this 1-2 punch of I want you to review the question, the test material, i.e., why the right answer is right, wrong answer is wrong. That is critical, right? But what we have to do after that, that's actually where most students stop. Where you actually grow is identifying what were you doing in your process to lead you to right answer, wrong answer. What inhibited your understanding in the way you were approaching the question? When you learn why this answer was right and the other ones are wrong, you are going to be the best in the world at doing that individual question again. But you're never going to see that question again. You might see similar ones, but you're going to hop into a totally new question the next one. So what you have to pull out of that one is where did you misread? Where were you too cursory? Did you attack enough? Was your prediction soft? Where did the answer choices mix you up? And what was it about the language there, your mindset, your emotions that led you to get mixed up that moment? Because what that allows you to do in the next question is you say, oh, this one is really similar to that other one I missed. I'm starting to not pay attention. I feel kind of confused at this point. My prediction feels soft. We can nip those things in the bud before missing another question. So learn what you can from the content, reflect on your own performance in a way that allows you to improve, right? You could read every single strengthen question in the world, understand why every strengthen question is a strengthener, and still be bad at the next strengthen question you hop into. If we don't figure out what in our process of figuring out what strengthens, what doesn't, sometimes goes south. Okay. Other questions? You guys are asking some great ones in chat. How do you get your skills to match your performance? Are there ways to practice beyond timed sections? Yes. So for me, actually, the best way for me to practice what I call method, this is like that bridge between skills and performance, getting that 1-to-1 ratio, was figuring out what is the Chris approach in LR, in LG, in RC. That is the first component. This means one thing I'm passionate about too, not just looking at this test and hyper focusing on the questions you miss, which I know all of our brains want to do. We're just looking at the ones highlighted in red, seeing how many there are, where they were, what types they were. We also have to look just as much at the questions that felt really good for us, the ones that like we really killed. In our study, we want to not only fix what's bad, but grow what's working really well. And so for me to identify what does it look like for Chris to smoke an LR question, just to totally dominate it? Well, I want to look at the ones that felt the best. See why this one made sense and other ones didn't. See what I did in this one to make a great prediction when in other ones I didn't. This all helps me figure out what does it feel like when I'm sailing smooth through a question. This relates to the second part of method. So one, identifying what it is. Two, we have to have this active process during the test of identifying, am I doing it or not? Every word, every sentence, every second of the test always reflecting of, am I doing the Chris method at RC? Am I doing the things that I've seen have led to success? Or am I kind of worried about time, so I'm pushing on anyway? Or do I just want to hit the answer choices so I can try to make sense of this backwards, even though that's not what I normally do? We're always in this sense of like kind of heightened awareness. We're almost like our own batting coach or like in our own earpiece while we're taking the test. So for me, there were times like when I was taking my final test, almost felt a little bit like out of body experience. Like I was yelling at myself when I was doing the things I knew I shouldn't have, so I could stop immediately. I was also telling myself like when I was stressed, when I'm worried about the timer, when I was starting to like get red in the face and like feel a little nervous. All those things happen on my test day, but I was familiar with confronting those during the process. So for us to have that direct translation of skill to performance on the test day, seeing a test score that's the same as our best PT, those are the things we have to figure out. What do you do in LR every time? What do you do in RC every time? How do I constantly assess in a test whether I'm doing it and it's going well, or if there's something I have to reassess? That's really what our process of study should be. Okay, another great question. Goodness, I love this. What are some ways to overcome fatigue during the test to maintain your skill as sections go on? I'm going to start with that one. There's a second question. Also planning on applying this cycle for the fall of 2025. Thoughts on taking August LSAT so close to the admissions cycle? Yeah, let me start with the test one. We can lead into the admissions one after. So the first thing I want you to think about whenever we talk about fatigue, always an element when we're taking tests, right? They're long, 4 sections. You get done with one and your brain immediately has to like restart into another one after like a minute break, right? Kind of wild. It sucks. But what I want you to reflect on is when are you feeling fatigued in your sections? And the harder question, why? Because what our brains are telling us right now is, well, we're fatigued because this test is long, the sections have a lot of words, which is all true. But where I found I was getting the most fatigued is when I was making these questions much more difficult than they should have been by not having that consistent method that I would apply. One thing that I try to get across to all of my students that I tutor and teach in class is kind of what I call the left to right approach, or reading as slowly as you need to understand. So what I mean by this is you'll see this when we hop into an LR question here soon. I want you to read as slowly as you need to understand. Have this goal for yourself that you only read everything one time. Like imagine that was a constraint on the test. The next time you study, the next time you drill, the next time you do a practice section, invent that rule for yourself. Imagine how you would read if that was a rule. You could only read this sentence one time. What would you do? You would live in that sentence as long as you needed to translate it in your own words and understand it. When it was like totally good, there's nothing more I could tell you, you'd move on to the next. What I used to do when I was getting really, really fatigued during my section is kind of read everything once, go, shit, what the hell did that say? Then I would kind of like read it until I saw like something I missed and then proceed on. But I was always bouncing back and forth between reading, rereading. The answer choices would make me reread the argument again. I was always just back and forth, which means overall, in a question where I could read it once, I was choosing sometimes to read that thing like 10, 11 times. For me, multiplied that across a section, holy cow, it's like doing every single section is sometimes like doing 7 or 8 sections. That's exhausting. So when I started to check in with my fatigue, that was the main thing driving it. I was always bouncing back and forth. I was trying to understand and answer all at the same time. I was reading answer choices while reading the argument. There was a lot of overlap. So what I like to do is just go left to right, top to bottom, as slowly as I need to understand, really having that goal of reading everything once, which I know sounds wild, but while you're studying, while you're training, building up to that LSAT, I want you to try it sometime. Like set that goal of, I'm only reading this thing one time. Just see how the question goes. Obviously, you can break it if you need to, But I want you to see what it takes for you to just live in that sentence, say you got it, then move on to the next. For me, it greatly reduced fatigue. Second part of this question, planning on applying this cycle for the fall of 2025, thoughts on taking the August LSAT so close to the admission cycle. So this, I want to be clear, if you are applying for the fall of 2025 and you're looking at taking in August 2024, I think that can work. That means you'd be able to apply in September, August 2024. That's essentially what I did. I think the high score that I got on my LSAT was on an August exam. Got that back in September. What I did in advance of that was have all of my test materials prepped. That was at the time in my study when I was doing my best at studying. I learned how to learn at that point. So I was like able to make my time efficient. Hour day in the LSAT was like more than enough for me to keep growing and getting better. So I spent a lot of that time writing all my statements, targeting the schools that I wanted to, looking at the optional essays they had. So as soon as that test score came in, it was like the last thing I had before I sent that thing off. So I think you're totally fine that way, but I would make sure to look at those documents you have to get and work on those before. Other question here. It's bad to take the test in April to apply for fall 2024. People saying they won't even look at my application. So here's the thing. Let me tell you the story of the outlier, and then I'll tell you kind of the general rule. So I started at Wash U this past fall. Love it. One of my favorite schools I've ever been to. I had a friend that I met in orientation who actually knew me from LSAT Demon, which was wild. Imagine me moving to like this new campus, starting law school. Somebody walks up to me and they're like, Chris. And I'm like, do we know each other? It's like, yeah, I was an LSAT Demon student. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not a celebrity at all. So anyone recognizing me in public, I'm like, you have to be family or something that I forgot. Anyways, his name is Jabal, really, really cool guy. He actually applied to go to Wash U 3 days before that orientation. He had taken the exam that month, applied 3 days before, or sorry, 4 days before class actually, got to orientation late, got a full ride, got admitted to Wash U. But you know what made that happen? Jabal had like a 4.0 and a 179. Anytime he would have sent that application in, they would have looked at him. He probably could have sent that thing in after class had started, and Wash U would have been like, we'll figure it out. Come on down, come hang out with us. So when you are looking at applying towards the end of a cycle, or even after some of these deadlines or right before admission, you have to realize you are not in the bargaining position anymore. What you're hoping is to like get into the school like Indiana Jones style before the gate closes and like crushes you on the way in, right? You're just hoping to get there. That's what schools want in their applications. They want you to apply when they have their full classes in. They already have their medians created. They know what their ranking is going to be based on who's coming to their school. Like they're set. So if they let you in, they're doing you a favor and they'll make you pay like they're doing you a favor. If you apply at the beginning of a cycle, though, these schools are really in flux. They don't have any students that are committed. A lot of these schools won't have a ton of students that apply super early in the cycle. So if they see a number on your application they like, they could either make a move on it, offer you some money, try to get you to come, or they just have to hope they're going to be able to figure it out. My experience in applying early with a number these schools liked is they said, we're going to take this guy, even though he was a splitter. My GPA sucked. My LSAT was good. They let me in because they can start constructing their medians early in the cycle. That's what those schools are there to do. They say they have this holistic process. You meet with an admissions rep, they'll be like, oh my gosh, we love your work experience. And I'm sure they do. But at the end of the day, they have to make sure their school is going up the rankings instead of down. What they have to do that is make sure their LSAT meetings are going up, their GPA meetings are going up based on their incoming students. If you apply when they have most of those students already in the house, committed, they can see what their medians are, there's not going to be a lot you can do to impress them unless it comes way over the top. So I made the tough choice to push my cycle, my application cycle. I had a 169 in time to apply in a previous cycle, which it was a score I was super happy with. That was originally my goal score when I started. I was like, if I get a 169 when I first started, like I'm chilling. I'm perfect. I got that 169. I'd already had PTs that were higher. And like I knew I was still getting better at the test every day. I made the choice to push it another year to apply. And I was so thankful I did. My 173 wildly different in admissions results than a 169 would have. And a 173, some places isn't even that special anymore. I think WashU's medians are already like 174 or something, like craziness. And so for me, I pushed, so thankful, because I would have been in wild amounts of debt with that 169 with the schools I wanted to go to, or I would have been at schools that were like much different in outcomes. Thankfully, I'm at a school I really love. I'm also at a school that employers really love and can set up the career that I want to. So if I would have gone to a different school like that I was looking at initially, I would have to be like scrapping every minute to network, talk to other attorneys, make myself a standout in the class. I'm kind of just at WashU doing my thing, and things are working out. So another admissions question here. What if you have a high LSAT and lower GPA, high GPA or lower LSAT? Which circumstance do they prefer? And would having a high LSAT but lower GPA stop you from getting scholarships? No. Let me show you a resource. I share this often. Use this site carefully. Let me first qualify what it is, what parts I think are accurate, what aren't. This is a site called lsd.law. You've heard Ben and Nate talk about it on the podcast every once in a while. This is a website where users upload their admissions results and their application statistics. I just linked my profile in chat. So if you want to take a look, that's me. And that's all the schools I applied to when I applied, my stats, what it looked like. So for me, I was a below GPA median candidate at all the schools I applied. What that means is my 3.6 and the way it affected their rankings is the same as somebody applying with a 2.7, right? If I'm below the median, I'm below the median. And that's how medians work, right? So it wasn't doing me any favors. I was a splitter candidate. There are schools that make their money admitting splitter candidates. They just balance them out. They admit somebody with a high LSAT, low GPA. The next student they admit is going to be a high GPA with a lower LSAT, right? Splitters can have great success in applications. It's hard to quantify which one is worth more. I think the general research shows that LSAT is worth a little bit more than GPA, and that the LSAT is one standardized experience that they do, and there are fewer like 180s on the LSAT than there are 4.0s or 4.3 these days GPAs. So I think it has a little bit more weight. They're both things the schools are ranked on. And so you can leverage that the way you want. But here, like if you look, for example, at WashU, if anybody opens that school page, what you'll see is like, they're commonly known as like the school with the right angle of death. If you look at those green dots in their admissions graph, means if you're above this number, either LSAT, GPA, you're in. Like that's it. If you're below those numbers, good luck. A lot of schools work that way. So I got great scholarships as a splitter candidate, but that means you should target schools that are very splitter friendly. Find the schools that want that in their incoming class, apply to those. Awesome question. Do schools look at GPAs based on the difficulty of the degree college? So certainly they look. They look at everything in your application. Absolutely. And, I always joke about these schools aren't holistic. They're trying to protect their medians and grow. That's true. They also still look at the rest of your application, right? They're going to have lots of candidates who apply with your same stats. They're going to choose to admit some of those over another, right? So a lot of that work experience, other things, they do matter, not as much as LSAT and GPA. But when we look at GPAs and academic majors specifically, I think the one area I've often seen in law school applications having advantage is students that come with a STEM degree and can write an addendum for their lower GPA because it was like a very difficult like engineering or chemistry program, particularly in law. That opens students to a lot of niche practice areas and patent and IP litigation kind of stuff that need a technical background. So law schools know if they admit students with that STEM background, they're very likely to get a job that requires that degree experience that they have. Another factor that schools get ranked on is student employability. So they look at a STEM degree, and even if somebody has a little bit lower GPA, they're really confident they could get a job somewhere doing IP stuff or IP litigation. Now, if you have a STEM degree and you don't want to do that, well, I don't know that I'd advertise that. Yeah, that's fine. I'd make it part of your narrative. My lower GPA was because this experience, but that's something that can pay off in the cycle as well. But it always comes back to what these schools are going to get ranked on. Never forget that. Another question here, are more recent LSATs different than older ones? In some ways, yes. So Like some of those older LSATs, for example, have like really, really funky logic games or LR questions with like a format like you've never seen before in your life. But what all of these questions do is test the same core set of skills: reading, understanding, application. So whether it's an old LSAT or a new LSAT, they all give us an opportunity to grow in the ways that we need to. And any question that's ever been written on the LSAT is something they could bring back or use in a new LSAT format. I remember one of the tests that I took that I really sucked on, one of the actual LSATs. This might have been the time I bombed really bad. There's a really old style logic game. It was one of those with like agriculture over like 5 years and like things were moving around in like cycles and stuff. And there's a few games like that. I wasn't prepped for it when I went in there. And what I realized was my study had been isolated to needing things to have a similar shape and format. I wanted ordering games that were like left to right, 5 lines in a row, or I wanted grouping games that were like 1, 2, 3, maybe, and a really set for structure for how those go together. Sometimes I started to find that doing those old tests where things look a little funky, where they're a little bit different, actually forced me to encounter new situations that were a better test of how I was doing and how I could attack these questions. Like if I saw a standard, like sufficient for necessary flaw in a question, at some points in my study, I was kind of like sleepwalking through it, right? But if I took one of those a little bit older, sometimes a little bit funkier tests, I had to like reorient and make sure I was still doing what I was doing. So I found great value in doing those, even in the prep for actual exams. Any other questions about general test stuff before we hop into a couple questions here? Feeling good? Okay. So I pulled up a couple questions here that students sent me, but the chat has also been moving. So one student asked for test 60, section 3, question 11, which I think could be a good one. I just linked it in chat if anyone wants to take a look-see. So what I want to do is kind of model what my read through on this question would be. I don't think I've ever done this one before, but I want you to see like how I would read these things. I'm also going to ask you questions throughout. I want this to be like more of a dialogue about how we can make meaning of this together. But these are all things that I'd be thinking in my head as I'm going through. The one thing I want us to return to is that goal, that concept of reading everything one time, slowly as we need to understand. Okay, so let's try this out. This is test 60, section 3, question 11. Okay, a mass of black water, sounds gross already, containing noxious organic material swept through Laurel Bay last year. Okay, great. So this is just a pure fact, right? We have a fact here on the page. I want to read this as a premise. You'll hear that old LSAT truism of like, don't attack the premise, just accept it, which is true. I'm not going to say like a mass of black water didn't sweep through it. Well, it did. I'm going to accept that, right? This is a fact you told me. What I want to do, though, is not be passive in reading this premise. I want to start to think like, okay, if this is the foundation you're building on, where could you logically go next? What could you connect? And also start to think about what things couldn't you connect, right? So we have some specific terms here we can think about and hold on to. We know things, this black water swept through last year, right? So we have a little bit of a time component. We know that this black water contained noxious organic material. Could we, from this premise alone, determine that something bad happened because of this noxious organic material? Not necessarily, no. Do we know from the word contained how much it is, how little it is, if it's like one piece of noxious organic material, if it's like entirely noxious organic material? We have no idea at this point. But what I'm doing in reading this sentence is starting to play with its limits. I want to see what's out of bounds and what could be in bounds in this. So when I see a conclusion that's taking me likely somewhere out of bounds, I might have already had that thought. This is how I can save time in attacking arguments. Let's press on. Some scientists believe that this event was a naturally occurring but infrequent phenomenon. Interesting. Anytime I have a sentence that says like some of this group thinks this, I feel like I can just tell we're setting up a disagreement, right? So what do I think this argument's going to do from here? Probably negate one of these two qualifications. Either say it's not infrequent or say it's not naturally occurring. I'm guessing it might be the naturally occurring part. they're going to negate because people would know whether this happens a lot or not. I'm guessing we're probably going to lead into maybe a conclusion that says it's not naturally occurring. So let's see. The Blackwater completely wiped out 5 species of coral in the bay, including mounds of coral that were more than 2 centuries old. Okay. So this Blackwater event, this one specifically, wiped out 5 species of coral. Nice. Okay. So we have in this sentence prior that these scientists say it's a naturally occurring but infrequent phenomenon, means we're kind of relating them into a category. What I want to be careful is not viewing this Blackwater event as distinct, right? This one might have been particularly bad for coral when the other ones weren't, or something, right? I don't know that the noxious material they contained was the same. Again, I'm recognizing the limits, what could be inbounds, out of bounds in some of these premises. So we haven't hit our conclusion yet. We have all of these facts. This conclusion is going to be wrong because it's going to pretend like it's connected to these premises, and it's not. The best way to find flaws in arguments is to read the conclusion and then see how I can sever some of these premises for it. Figure out why this premise doesn't prove this conclusion by putting an attack in there. So let's see this conclusion. Therefore, even if this Blackwater phenomenon has struck the bay before, not the day before, even if it struck before, it did not reach last year's intensity at any time in the past 2 centuries. Now, why would it say that? Remember, I have no idea about the makeups or the noxious materials in any of these other black waves. I know that this one did knock down this coral that was there for more than 2 centuries, right? But what this one is saying is no other black water event could have struck that coral because they weren't knocked over. I really don't know what it takes to knock out a piece of coral. This argument doesn't tell us that, right? So this doesn't necessarily have to relate to the intensity here. Can anyone think of any other way to attack this conclusion? How could we sever some of these premises for it? Can anyone see? This author is saying there's no way any other Blackwater event touched this coral, had this same intensity. What if there was this process of like all of them kind of slowly weakening the coral? What if this type of event happened every single day? Each one kind of like weakened the coral a little bit, right? The straw that broke the camel's back, right? What if this is finally the one that knocked it over? Maybe the coral had a pre-existing condition, somebody said. Sure, maybe this pre-existing condition could have been given from an earlier Blackwater event, right? What this argument is doing is saying this is a once in a lifetime Blackwater event, right? Even if it happened before, this one was particularly bad. We cannot draw that conclusion because none of our premises give us the information to do so. There could be lots of reasons that this one knocked the coral over that don't relate to this one being more intense. I think the best attack here is probably that straw that broke the camel's back concept. Maybe lots of Blackwater events were hitting this coral. This is finally the one that killed it. So let's see what type of question we're answering here. Which one of the following is an assumption required by the argument? Excellent. Necessary assumption. So I read these as the correct answer is something the author has to agree with. The correct answer is going to feel like a premise the author would have wished they put in that they kind of forgot. It's something that's going to allow this argument to make sense. It won't have to guarantee the argument. It won't have to make the argument win. But what this premise is going to do is explain a little bit about what was in the author's head for them to make this conclusion. So I eliminate answer choices by showing ways the author could wiggle out of it, ways the author could say no. So let's practice that here in A, for example. A says, masses of black water such as that observed last summer come into the bay more frequently than just once every 2 centuries. Why would this author really care about how often they come when the author's conclusion is about intensity? The author even said in the conclusion, even if it's happened before, that's them like giving away the frequency part. They don't care. They're saying this one's particularly bad. So knowing that like it's happened lots of times before, the author would say like, I don't know that. I don't have to agree with that. I'm just saying this one's really bad, right? We can eliminate A with that critique. Let's check out B. Every species of coral in the bay was seriously harmed by the mass of black water that swept in last year. What do we think about this one? Does anybody want to try to see, does the author have to agree with this? What are your thoughts on it? You all took the test. I'd love for someone else to talk. Anyone have thoughts on B? We're always trying to eliminate. How could we eliminate B? I
The
see someone say too strong in chat. Oh yeah, Everell, go ahead.
Yeah, the premise says it wiped out 5 species of coral in the bay, including this 2-century-old one. And this
Nice.
answer says every species was seriously
Yes,
harmed.
absolutely. And so when students say like too strong or this word is too strong, yes, what I want as well is for you to kind of connect that to the specific premise and content of the answer choice. Because any of us can read a word like every and be like, that's really strong, and have that gut feeling like we don't want it. But if we're doing this test the way we're supposed to, we should know exactly why every isn't something we want to select here. And Aberall actually got us to just that point. The author talked about 5 species of coral that were hurt, right? I don't know anything about the other ones. If the argument didn't talk about it, author doesn't have to accept it. All right, C, massive black water that swept through the bay last year did not decimate any plant or animal species that makes use of coral. Did the author talk about species that make use of coral? Not really. This goes in my category of like the author didn't talk about it, so I don't really want to think about it now. Just a little out of scope. Okay, D. The mounds of centuries-old coral that were destroyed were not especially in fragile condition just before the Blackwater swept in last year. Oh. This kind of destroys that attack we had, right? Makes it so it wouldn't be such a good attack here. Is there any way the author could fail to agree with this? Could the author say no to D at all? I don't think so. If so, I think this whole conclusion like doesn't make any sense whatsoever, right? If D is plugged in there, we have coral centuries old that was perfectly healthy, not fragile at all. Well, what would need to destroy that? Probably something that's of higher intensity, which is what our author is claiming. Again, doesn't guarantee that conclusion, cuts off a weakness, and this is something the author can't disagree with, right? Or else their conclusion doesn't really make sense. Okay, let's check out E really quick, and then we'll answer any other questions about this one before hopping into another one. E, older specimens of coral in the bay were more vulnerable to damage from the influx of black water than were young. Again, did the author make any claim about age? Is this something the author talked about? We have 2 centuries old, right? But our conclusion wasn't anything about the age of corals that were destroyed. It was rather, look at these corals. They've been here for 2 centuries. That's proof no other Blackwater event was tough enough to destroy these coral, right? Wouldn't really matter if this was more prone than other ones, because still we have this coral that we're talking about in particular that was standing, wasn't destroyed. Does anybody have questions here about this one? Okay. Let me do a little bit of, oh, I can't actually do a poll. All of you did LR and RC, right? Here we kind of got a little taste of what LR would be like. I had some students that were asking about doing some RC passages. I think we totally have time to read through one, do a couple questions. It would be tough for me to just hop into some of the questions and answer them because I haven't read the passages yet. But does anybody have a passage they would want us to kind of read through and see? I teach the final passage here at LSAT, which is our advanced RC class. So I'm happy to do RC if students want it, but I'd want us to start soon so we could actually get through there. What do we think? Feel free to type in chat. You want to keep doing LR, you want to do some RC. Unfortunately, the polls are broken for me, so I can't submit one. So I see 2 people. Early Bird Gets the Worm talking about passage 4 of 73. We could totally do that. Yeah, let's do that. Oh, another student asked about passage 4, test 60. Hey, so I'm going to do 73 because that one is open to any free students that are in here. They're able to do that one. But if you had questions about passage 4, test 60, hang out after class, after the hour. Let me talk you through it. Odds are I've probably read it before or done these before. So if there were questions that were difficult or times you got hung up, I can still help you out here. So I'm going to open up passage 4, test 73. I'm going to do a quick read through. So anybody who comes to my classes, you know I love to spend a lot of time in these passages. For this one, you're probably going to get a closer look of what it's like when I kind of read through this, being efficient, finding purpose, moving through. This is going to be an advanced passage. So if you feel lost or I'm moving super quick, that's okay. I'm here to answer questions that you have, but because of the abbreviated time we have trying to end at the hour, I'm going to make sure we can get through this and do some of the questions here. So one thing I want us to think about to frame this experience before we go in, some of my regulars have heard me talk about this. This one looks like a comparative passage, which I know for a lot of students, like totally stresses them out. You hate comparative passages. Um, what I actually find is they're incredibly helpful, and I get excited when I see a comparative passage because by nature of the structure of the passage, it's forcing me to do and think about the things I should be doing always, which is relating points of view to each other, finding times they disagree, finding times they do agree, always trying to answer that question of, could I step into this perspective's shoes to answer a question from their opinion? So we're going to have passage A, we're going to have passage B. What I want us to imagine is this sort of mental Venn diagram. So we've got A, we've got B. When we read passage A, we're just in that world. We're understanding everything this says, why they say it, what this author wants, what they're arguing for, right? When we hit B, we understand B in relation to A. We're trying to find points of overlap in the middle. We're also paying close attention to the things that make them totally distinct. We have some comparative passages where there's tons of overlap. These circles are very close. We have other ones that are super duper divergent. But what I'm trying to tell you is this is something we should do in every passage, whether it has an artificial divide in it or not, whether it has two authors or not, because even passages that have a single author often have multiple points of view about an issue. I am not understanding a point of view until I can tell you how it relates to another one and imagine myself stepping into either side of that debate and answering a question from that perspective. So our first job is going to be to read passage A, understand what that author wants, why they wrote this thing. Don't think about summarizing, don't think about memorizing facts, just thinking about what the hell this guy wants. What's their motivating purpose? When we see that, we're going to be able to translate this passage and relate it to B when we hit it. So this is test 73, passage 4. What is it? Property law. Oh boy. If you don't like this one, is law school for you? Probably. Property law kind of sucks. I'm in it now. It's whatever. Okay. Passage A. There are two principles that are fundamental to a theory of justice regarding property. Nice foundational sentence here. What I'm really waiting for is for the author to tell us these principles, then make an argument about them. But for me to understand that argument, I've got to understand these facts up front. So let's read just enough to do that. The principle of justice in acquisition. So acquisition means acquiring something, getting something. Principle of justice in acquisition specifies the conditions under which someone can legitimately come to own something that was previously not owned by anyone, right? Okay. This is like I fly in a magic spaceship and oh my gosh, I just discovered a new moon. I'm on it now. Can I own it? Can it be mine? Right? Or I find Atlantis. Nobody owns that. Could it be mine? I'm sure there are other newly created property. This is really what I'm thinking of, kind of discovery, that kind of stuff. This is what colonizers of the New World thought they were doing. Like, oh my gosh, this new land I found with nobody here, it's mine. It wasn't. Anywho, principle of justice in transfer. So we talked acquiring. This is me getting something that's never been owned. Probably a small subset of things. Principle of justice in transfer specifies conditions under which transfer of property from one person to another is justified. So this is, can I give another person my rights to this thing? I feel like the general rule should be yes. Like, I don't know, I want to give it, they want to receive it. Sure, have at it. But this is going to give us our two lanes we're talking about. Acquisition, transfer. Acquiring something never owned, giving something away. is what we're framing. Again, what I'm looking for is some argument to be made about these. Keep in mind these terms. One thing the LSAT does is we're calling these acquisition, we're calling them transfer right now. The passage will likely change some of our terminology. They'll try to do a little bit of switcheroo in how we're talking about this stuff. So always follow the subject in each sentence we're talking about, making sure you know how to build this constructive knowledge of the passage. We did a really good job understanding this first paragraph. And if I don't work in later paragraphs to match ideas to this one, I just wasted my time. So we're going to follow this subject, make sure we know what's coming when we see it. Okay, given such principles, if the world were wholly just, oh, this sounds like an argument. We love that. Okay, if the world were wholly just, spoiler alert, it's not. The following definition would exhaustively cover the subject of justice regarding property. This feels very LR-ish. I kind of like it, right? We have some facts. We have an incoming argument here. Okay. So these items we're going to see after this would cover everything that's required for justice about property. Acquiring, transferring, everything is in these three items we see here. So let's parse this out. I want to see how we can match these up to acquiring and transfer as we go. One, a person who acquires property in accordance with the principle of justice and acquisition is entitled to that property. Okay, what a stupid rule. This is what reading laws is going to feel like. If you're justified in getting property, you're justified in that property. Right? You can have it, right? Great, awesome. Okay, if you're allowed to have this, you can have it, is what one says. Two, a person who acquires property in accordance with the principle of justice in transfer from someone else who is entitled to the property is entitled to the property. What does this mean? Somebody can't steal a bike and give it to me, you know? I can't just get a stolen bike and say it's mine. That person stole it. It wasn't theirs to give. That's all 2 says, right? You're actually going to cover this in property law. A thief can't convey good title is the common law rule. Same thing here. Okay, so straightforward, common sense. 3, no one is entitled to any property except by repeated applications of 1 and 2. Getting anything means I have to acquire something that I'm allowed to keep, totally new, no one's owned it, or someone who can give it gives it to me, right? It's all just a matter of who's got a right to this thing. If you've got a right to this thing, you can give it. If someone with a right gave me something, I can keep it. Cool. A lot of words to say very, very little. How LSAT? Okay, we have all these rules spelled out, really looking for the author to actually say something unique here. Some argument, some thought, something. However, not all actual situations are generated in accordance with the principles of justice and acquisition and justice in transfer. This is one of those things where, like, man, if we were shaking on these terms before, this sentence is really like kicking our ass. If we have translated things into like our own words, common sense stuff, like kicked the stupid LSAT words out of here, replaced it with our own ideas, these sentences aren't so scary. So not everything in life is a matter of owning this newly created thing or getting something properly from somebody. That's all this sentence is saying. Okay, do the work just to make it not so scary. It'll pay off. Some people steal from others or defraud them, for example. No way. I don't believe that. The existence of past injustices raises the issue of the rectification of injustice. Okay. Robin Hood has just entered the chat. Hello. We're talking about justice here, right? Who's justified in doing something? This looks like it's going to a really cool Robin Hood direction here. Notice what my brain is doing, and I want yours to do this too. One thing that really made me struggle on test day was like entering the special like LSAT test brain, where I was trying to be like logical, trying to read things different, trying to like hide my personality, honestly, hide my life experience, honestly. It meant I was way worse at understanding things. I sucked at doing the test that way. Let yourself be human, be yourself on this test. You're going to thank yourself for it. You'll be more engaged. You'll understand things better. So when I see that and think Robin Hood, that's cool for my brain. You might read that and think like something totally different. What I want to encourage you to do is like practice the skill of thinking something. React to this test, these passages with who you are and your life experiences. Okay, so again, the existence of past injustice raises the issue of the rectification of justice. So if somebody stole something, okay, what's justified to do against them, right? What would justice demand in this sense? If past injustice has shaped present ownership in various ways, what? Oh, this is literally what I just asked, but in stupid LSAT words. The existence of past injustice raises the issue of the rectification of injustice. Oh, I read that same thing again. If past injustice has shaped present ownership in various ways, what, if anything, ought to be done to rectify that injustice? Right? Okay. How do we fix that? What's justified? Somebody stole my bike. A principle of rectification would use historical information about previous situations and injustices done in them. This seems weird. Hold on. Okay. So a principle of rectification. This is the first thing we want to parse. Rectification, we want to think to rectify something. We want to think to make it right. Right? Even if you look at rectification and you're like, what the hell does that mean? I'm never going to use that word. I don't want to use that word. We can still just liken it to the sentence before, right? What ought to be done to rectify? What should we do? What ought to be done? That last sentence gives us that. Okay, so what ought to be done would use historical information about previous situations and injustices done in them. Okay, precedent. What do we do before? And information about the actual course of events that flowed from these injustices. This is like if Chat GPT was in charge of justice or something. To produce a description of the property ownership that should have resulted. What in the world? Actual ownership of property must then be brought into conformity with this description. So somebody stole my bike. If we understand this paragraph, if I can speak from passage A's perspective, I should be able to say, this is what we do. We just had everything spelled out for us here, right? A good proof of concept, testing out the worlds we build of this passage is saying like, okay, we have a stolen bike. What does passage A say we should do about it? Does anyone want to get hot on the mic and tell me what we should do about it? A bike was stolen. I'm calling passage A Justice Center. What are they gonna describe to me? Anyone know? Promise, you know. Or even if you don't, we can know together. You can do this. Okay, got a DM. Looks really on the money. It says, go back and look at previous bikes stolen and figure out what they did to rectify or fix it. That is certainly a big component of it. We see using historical information about previous situations and injustices done in them, previous bikes stolen and the injustices done by it. Okay. What else do we do? Is there any other component? What else is going on here? The other thing says information about the actual course of events that flowed from these injustices. What would that mean? When we allow LSAT words to stay really abstract, we don't translate them, really parse them out into like life experience, they kick our ass. Like that's playing the game they want and the house always wins. What I want to do is make these words not those words by thinking of an example, thinking of an analogy, finding something that I can use to translate this. So let's see. This is information about the course of events that flowed from the injustices. What does this mean? It's consequences or what happened. Somebody stole my bike. Maybe I didn't get to work on time. I lost my job. I lost my job. I then lost my house, right? And then my wife left me. My kids got taken away. My life was really sad after this bike theft, right? So that informs what would need to be done justice-wise to rectify the situation, okay? So then that produces a description of the property ownership that should have resulted. Who is justified in having this bike? Actual ownership of property must then be brought into conformity with this description. So what can we look about passage A and say? That when there's an injustice, what do? We look to precedent. We look to the consequences that happen from that precedent. And through that, we identify who should own the thing or what should be done, right? Actual ownership of this property has to be brought into conformity with that, i.e. what should be done, what would rectify this past behavior, these consequences. Okay, so what's key in passage A, I think? this concept of injustice, I think, actually. We had this first part of the passage where they're talking about justified acquisition, justified transfer, so that we get to the last part where we're saying that's not how things always work, though. Sometimes we have injustice, and what do we do about it? So passage A's solution to injustice was looking at precedent, looking at consequences, bringing property rights ownership into harmony with that. What's B going to do? Probably something different. The two options you can see oftentimes in comparative passages are I agree on the issue, I disagree on the issue, or I'm applying what you said to a context, right? Either way, every sentence we read in B, we're going to try to relate to A. We're trying to play with this Venn diagram. I want to figure out, would A agree with this? Would A disagree with it as soon as possible? And usually they don't bury the lead too far. In a quick amount of time, we'll usually be able to relate this if that's what we're keen on. Okay. In 1790, the United States Congress passed the Indian Non-Intercourse Act. They should fix the names on these things. That could mean lots of different stuff. You know, when all of you get your law degrees and you go to Congress, think about the Indian Non-Intercourse Act and what people could construe it to mean. All I'm going to say. We have great politicians in this room, I'm sure. Okay. Which requires that all transfers of lands from Native Americans to others be approved by the federal government. Come on. You've heard them enough. Does this seem justified? Right? Is this justice? So what I want somebody to do, this is going to be really hard, but I promise team, this is how we get better. When you study, I want you to do this. So if this is pushing you, you're scared to get on the mic, you're scared to participate, this is your time to actually improve. I'm trying to help you. Let me help you. So we look at this first sentence. How can we relate this act to principles of acquisition or transfer? How could we figure out if this is a situation where something is justified? What do we think? Could someone relate this first sentence to acquisition or transfer? Promise this is your chance to get better. While you're thinking about it, I got a great question. It says, passage 8 is not going to detail about consequences that resulted from injustice, right? I think it might. When we look at that line that says information about the actual course of events that flowed from these injustices, flowed talks about something after the injustice, right? This isn't something leading up to the injustice. Now, I frame this as consequences. This wouldn't necessarily have to be bad outcomes. This could be the judicial decisions that were made, the things that were done about this injustice. But what we're looking at here is we have an event. I'm looking at the past to get precedent history, right? And I'm looking at the things that flowed from this, right? The solution should be a response to those things about what should have resulted. Does that make sense? So that could be consequences. It doesn't have to be like bad consequences, though. So anyway, back to passage B. Can anyone get on the mic, maybe? I don't know who is even in here. I see 3 of you. You look great. Anyone else that's here? I don't know. All right, I'll take this one, I promise. But this is the way I want you to think. When I say like we connect meaning from A to B, that means when I see this first sentence in passage B, I want to be thinking about acquisition of property, transfer of property, how those relate to justice, right? Because we might get an argument about it that's something different, or this could be an application of passage A. So when we look at property, right, and this United States Congress owning land, right, or transfers of native land, first of all, would this be land that we think the United States Congress acquired in harmony with the principles of justice? I would say no. Yeah. Spoiler alert if nobody's ever taken a U.S. history class, but that was not a just process, right? Wasn't new land that nobody had discovered. It had been discovered, lived on, worked. It got taken away anyway. So if somebody has lands that aren't theirs, can they transfer? Not necessarily. I don't know. But this is an act about the transfer of lands from Native Americans, right? This makes me wonder, is this the land that Native Americans have always lived in, that they've always owned, that's still theirs, right? Or is this land they've been moved to like a reservation after the United States Congress might have taken their original land, right? So let's imagine a situation where is this land that Native Americans have always lived at? Who's the US government to step in the way and say they can't transfer it? Principle of justice and transfer says they own this land, it's theirs. They should be able to give it, right? That's what passage A would say. So if this is land the United States acquired, that's not fair, not principles of justice. If this is land the US Congress is blocking that Native Americans have owned, that's also not within the principles of justice outlined in A. Seems like we have potentially an unjust scenario. Passage A tells us what to do in those situations, right? This is where we'd want to be thinking. Already one sentence in. We've run this through the concept of passage A. We've linked it to this main point a little bit. We're starting to talk injustice. I know I said I'd move quickly through this passage, and look at me. Anyone who goes to my classes regularly knows I always go over time. If you have to go, I know it's been a long day. They will upload this. You can catch the rest of the passage. Okay, so this law has not been changed in any relevant respect, and it remains in effect today. Yeah, year on this bad boy was 1790. I'm not a government whiz, but that was a pretty young United States of America. Now it's a little bit later than 1790, a couple years at least. So this law has always been on the books. The Non-Intercourse Act. Its purpose is clear. It was meant to guarantee security to Native Americans against fraudulent acquisition by others of the Native Americans' land holdings. Come on. Native Americans are like, hey, we want to transfer this land to somebody, and the US government is like, no, you can't, because I'm protecting you. You can't do that. Someone could be taking advantage of your land. You know who's an expert in that? Me, the US government. I know it when I see it from experience. Come on. This is how I have fun in RC passages. I want you to do the same on the test. It can be a fun experience if we make it so. Okay. Several suits have been initiated by Native Americans. Huh. Go figure. Wow. But I thought we were looking out for their interests. Anyway, several suits have been initiated by Native American tribes for recovery of lands held by them when the Non-Intercourse Act took effect. Oh, the recovery of lands held by them when the Non-Intercourse Act took effect. Trying to recover some lands that were there in 1790. Interesting. Okay. So we have a situation here that kind of, to me, presents some injustice, right? We know what passage A would say about that. Look at history, look at precedent, look at the course of events that flowed from this, right? We have a big course of event. This is something that happened in 1790. We're now in 2024. Maybe this was written earlier than today. We have a lot of time still, okay? So let's see. One natural, one might almost say obvious. They could, I guess. It's up to you, author. Way of reasoning about Native American claims to land in North America is this. Oh, this is probably going to talk about the acquisition transfer thing we already did. When you are like on the money interpreting these passages, a lot of these future sentences will feel redundant. You've already had these thoughts. Okay, so one way of reasoning is that Native Americans were the first occupants of this land. Okay, they were the ones that acquired the title to these lands. Nobody owned it. It was theirs, right? Reflect like we did on what that would mean about this Non-Intercourse Act. Before the European invasion of North America, the land belonged to them. True, yeah. In the course of that invasion and its aftermath, the land was illicitly taken from them. This is that injustice, right? This is not a proper transfer. This isn't somebody who had the land willingly giving it over, right? Okay. This would mean, according to that second rule or the third rule in passage A, the US couldn't really pass it to anyone, right? They couldn't give this land. They couldn't have any role in the property rights of this land because it was never acquired by them officially. Okay. In the course of the invasion, illicitly taken from them, the current owners lack a well-founded right to the land, which we just said, which now lies illicitly in their hands, which we also just said. Ideally, the land should be restored to its rightful owners. This may be impractical. Compromises might have to be made. We get a lot of author opinion in this. But the original wrong can most easily be righted by returning the land to them or by returning it wherever that is feasible. So when we look at the relationship between passage B and passage A, how would anyone describe it? Agree, disagree, same team, different teams? when we imagine this Venn diagram, what do we see?
I was gonna say passage A describes more of a principle of the right or the justice way to do land transfers, and then passage B shows an example of an injustice and then offers the solution, which is also supported by the principle.
I love it. I think that is a perfect description. You know those LR questions that are like, the principle is you should never do this if you're an ethical person. And then the answer choices are like, what's an example of this principle? That's what this passage feels like to me. We have passage A that gave us like, here are your rules for how you create justice. Here's a situation that's unjust. We have a solution at the end. We can see this solution very in line with what passage A was talking about. What did we do? We looked at history, right? The things before, tried to find property ownership, found it was illicitly owned. That made it an unjust situation. We talked about how to then rectify that historical injustice through a present course of action, right? This seems perfect. So for me, I think we see theory, passage A, application in passage B. For me, very aligned here. They're almost one passage throughout. I got a DM question here. It says, are all LSAT passages true or some made up situations? I don't actually know. I could say looking at passage A, this is not a full description of property rights. The one that's missing here is acquiring property by conquest, which is what the US talked about in some very early cases, discussing these same issues, whether you believe in that or not. But you often see some bits and pieces of reality in these, not always guaranteed to be factually true for sure. So when we look at a comparative passage, but any passage here, what I want you to think about is not summarizing what you read. A lot of students, when they look for that main point question, they start to create like a book report in my head of like, we talked about this, then we talked about this, then we talked about that, then we talked about this. What those questions are asking is, why were these written? Not what did they write? Why were they written? So I would look at passage A and say, this was written to explain like moral principles about property. What's justice? What's injustice? What to do? When I look at B, I want to say, this is an example of an unjust property situation with a solution, right? This is why they were written. If I need to go into the factual basis of any of these, we did a good job reading. We know where the facts are. We've got good spatial memory of where we talked about this, but I want my prediction to be broad here, right? Let me actually go back and see what questions. Oh, anybody have specific questions in here they wanted to cover? Drop them in chat if we want. What questions were tough on this one? Let me see. Looks like 23 is a tough one. Let's just hop into that one while you're working on it. Okay. So this one says, both passages explicitly mention which one of the following. Okay, so a couple things can happen here. We have to be prepared for them. This is a very classic example of that maxim we always say at LSAT Demon, that like in RC, we treat all the questions as must be trues, right? There's no could be's, there's no almost answers, there's no speculation. Every question on here has an answer we can prove. But a must be true situation is not always something that has an exact textual match. This is a question that may or may not. When we look at a must be true scenario, you can do two things. You can, one, repeat something that was explicitly stated, copying one line, putting it in the other place, right? The other thing you can do that also satisfies a must be true threshold is you take two things that were said, you either mash them together or you use them to create a new thing, right? 1 plus 1 equals 2. So for the must be trues, I could say ones, but also 2 must be true, even though that's like something totally different. I use those two things to make that other thing that has to be true. So this is one that it's really, really tough to predict. I kind of usually just hop in, but I want to know my threshold. I have to be able to prove these in both passages. What I do is I'm going to start thinking about passage A. If I can find passage A is a match for this in my recall, then I move on. But if I can't remember this from passage A, I already eliminate. I don't need to think about B. Let's talk about A. The transfer of property from one owner to another. Well, yeah, A was all about that. And B talks about that as well. this doesn't seem like it should be a level 5 difficulty question. To me, this just has to be the answer. In A, this is all we were talking about, transfer property. In B, this was like our solution at the end, right? When we say land restored to its rightful owners, that's transfer property. This is perfect. So let's see if there are any other answers in here that students got cut up on. B, a legal basis for the recovery of property. So when we see in passage B, look how it opened. We talk about transfers of lands from Native Americans to others be approved by the federal government. This is kind of talking about land transfer. Maybe this could be recovery. We also see at the end several suits been initiated by Native Americans for the recovery of land. This we kind of see. In passage B or passage A, I don't think we get there. We talk about these laws governing property. We talk about how solutions should be created. We don't actually get to the point of like, this is how recovery could happen, right? So passage B has it, passage A doesn't. Let's check out C, entitlement to property in a wholly just world. So when we were talking about like entitlement to property, I think we were really living in the world of passage A. This is like who is able to own something. Passage B just kind of talked about injustice already. Entitlement is also a really strange word here. I don't like it. The other thing is when we talk about wholly just here, I think that's just passage A as well. That might be a better way to think about this one. Concepts of justice, injustice, wholly just, that's just passage A. Passage B just talks about an injustice. We don't actually get a wholly just world mentioned. So I'd eliminate C on that. Let's check out D, the practicability of rectification of past injustice. That is just B. That's in that last section where they're talking about like, it could be impractical, do it where it's easy, find some other places, maybe you can't fix it. This is all related to like, how would this actually happen in real life? That's just a D thing. Remember, A was like a little bit above that frame. Morals, principles, justice. Didn't really get to like the actual nitty-gritty details. E, injustice committed as part of an invasion. Not quite. That is just passage A. Okay, let's do one more difficult one on this one. It's like 26 is a level 5. Let's check it out. The author of passage A would most likely characterize the purpose of the Indian Non-Intercourse Act. Oh, come on. As which one of the following? I had questions about this title myself. So me and passage A are really in the same boat. So the way we would attack this is first by thinking of like, what's the perspective of passage A? What is important to them? What is their belief? Because that's going to frame how they look at things. Really, this is just an application of what I think the main point of passage A should be, given this example. So when we look at passage A, what do they care about? Justice. Like, what's a just world of property? What do you do in an unjust situation? How do you recognize injustice? And then how would you rectify injustice? And so then when we look at this specific Indian Non-Intercourse Act, where it's mentioned, it's in this paragraph where what are we talking about? We're talking about rectification of property. We see meant to guarantee security to Native Americans against fraudulent acquisition by others. This to me relates to that injustice consequence and belief from passage A. This is an application of this thought. So what am I honing in for as my prediction? I want this to be something based in justice. Language about something that was unjust and this being a potential remedy for an unjust situation, right? Any answer here, what passage A would talk about is just justice. So anything else in here, I'm going to be really skeptical of. Okay, let's check out A, legitimization of actual property holdings during the 18th century. No, nothing about this was to legitimize holdings of property that people had. That's like, I'm sitting on this property, I need something to make it legitimate. That's not really what A is talking about, and not really what this act did either. This kind of mischaracterizes it. B, clarification of existing laws regarding transfer of property. I don't think A is really interested in like clarification of laws about property. I think like A's got these principles of justice and the principles of injustice. And I think that's like all A needs, right? So I think any answer A is going to have about this act is going to be in those terms about justice and justice here. Okay, C, assurance of conformity to the principle of justice in acquisition. Ooh, I don't think this is about acquisition. I think this is about transfer. Acquisition is like on the front end, new undiscovered land. This is like about transfer of property. Okay, D, prevention of violations of the principle of justice in transfer. Yeah, I think this is it. And this is actually why I hated this act so much, right? Because I was like, the Native Americans should have the right to transfer this land, right? That's why I was like so angry about it. But when we look at what this act does, it literally prevents transfer, right? It is one party wants to give land, the government gets to say like yes or no. That would mean this relates to injustice in that transfer context. So we see the justice we're looking for. This is the first one that's kind of talked about justice, injustice. It's relating to transfer, which this act is right in the middle of that process of. I think this is it. If this act was a good thing, beneficial thing, not the big evil government I was reading it as, this could totally be how this act would be described. This could stop bad transfer of land from happening. Let's eliminate E really, really quick. Implementation of a principle of rectification. I don't think so, because we have to think of what is the injustice that was done. The injustice is described in this second paragraph here, right? Land was illicitly taken from Native Americans, right? That is the injustice we have to rectify. This act doesn't actually get them original lands. It just prevents them from giving their lands in a way that they shouldn't or the government thinks is bad. So the difference for me between D and E is that E talks about rectification in a way that this act really doesn't accomplish. And that depends on where we can identify the injustice happening here in B. Question, yes.
I came to the same conclusion, but the different reasoning. I think
Sure.
when I
Tell
read
me.
D, it said prevention of violations of the principle. In passage B, it says its purpose is clear. It was meant to guarantee security against fraudulent acquisitions. And so that relates to point number 2 in passage A, where it says any person who acquires property in accordance with the principles of justice and transfers someone else who is entitled to the property. So if it's unjust, that means the person wasn't entitled to the property. So that's why they're preventing that violation. Like they're not violating number 2 is what, that's how I agree. I don't know in your assessment, it's like, oh, it had to deal something with transfer, but I don't know if that was more right or
Yeah.
less right.
I don't mind your process, and I don't necessarily think you're wrong. What I kind of do in these passages, though, is like extrapolate meaning into big picture understanding of what is this argument in big picture, what is this argument or concept in big picture, using those to answer questions in like the easiest, quickest way. So this means I rarely go back to the passage often to find like that smoking gun text support or link it to particular criteria here, because I think when you usually understand the direction, the purpose, and these concepts in a big framework, you don't really have to. And so my only process here was thinking about what A really cared about, this justice, talking about acquisition, transfer, when that led to injustice, applying that to the situation of the opening to passage B. I think your textual hooks are fine. They aren't necessarily things that I would disagree with. But for me to move through these passages efficiently with high accuracy, I don't try to find that textual match every time. This one is clearly the only one that relates to the content of the act, because the act is just about land transfer, not acquisition. And this relates to what A was talking about, and how can we transfer things? How can we acquire things? What's an unjust situation? So for me, I think you're fine. That's good. I think you could possibly answer some of these a little quicker with that bigger picture conceptual mind mapping here. Okay, I am over time on the class. It's 8:22 Eastern time. I know you all are probably tired. I'm going to cut the recording here. I hope your PT went well and you kind of saw what my process on questions would be. And you remember what we talked about at the beginning for how to review, how to grow in these test experiences. I'm going to hang out for some Q&A after. So if there's other questions you want to look at, get my quick thoughts on, or just general things you want to talk about off the recording, please stay. I would love to hang out for a bit. Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you next month for a PT. Bye, everybody.